top 10 worst muscle cars that deserve to be scrapped. Pretty much any American high-performance model after 1971 was neutered in terms of performance. The Ford Mustang was no exception. Granted, the Blue Oval's iconic model is technically classified as a pony car, but there were quite a few performance versions, which opened doors to the muscle car segment. The second-generation Mustang was built out of necessity for more fuel-efficient vehicles. Lee Iacocca was the mastermind behind this downsized Mustang, and frankly, it was making the best out of a bad situation. Power was practically non-existent, as even the range-topping 4.9-liter Windsor V8 was pumping out a laughable 142 horsepower, even in King Cobra guise, resulting in a 0 to 60 miles per hour, 97 km per hour time of 10.5 seconds. Still, the Ford Mustang II was sold in over 1.1 million copies from 1974 to 1978, while winning Motor Trend's Car of the Year in 1974. Big, comfortable, and fast are words that best describe the original 1964 Oldsmoile 442. Things only got better with the second generation, at which point the muscle car received an even bigger 455 cubic inch 7.5 liter V8. After that, everything started going down the drain until eventually the fourth generation hit the bottom. Chevy's faithful 305 V8 was still around, but made only 160 horsepower, resulting in a 10.5 second 0 to 60 miles per hour, 97 km per hour sprint. A more powerful 5.7 liter V8 arrived in 1980, but it was barely an improvement with 185 horsepower. A 5-speed manual was available, but the vast majority came with a 3-speed auto or a 4-speed manual transmission. The Pontiac GTO is considered as one of the model that founded the American muscle car segment. The fourth generation GTO came out in 1974 and shows how quickly things went downhill. Thankfully, the fourth generation GTO lasted only 1 year. The car shared the X-body platform as well as the general aesthetic with the third generation Chevy Nova and other compact GM offerings. There was only one engine option, a 5.7 liter 350 V8 that was neutered for a shameful 200 horsepower and somewhat decent 295 pound-feet, 400 Newton meter of torque. Transmission options included a 3-speed automatic and a 3 or optionally 4-speed manual, with the latter 0 to 60 miles per hour, 97 km per hour came after 7.7 seconds, while the rest needed 9.5 seconds. Despite stringent emissions regulations, the mid-1970s still had their fair share of large displacement muscle cars. The Ford Gran Torino sat in a class above the Mustang, as it was the bigger, more luxurious model in Ford's lineup. The range-topping engine for 1974 was a 7.4-liter 460 V8. Just a few years earlier, the same engine was rated at over 400 horsepower, but in this case, power was rated at 220 horsepower and 355 pound-feet, 482 Newton meter. The Gran Torino was a big, heavy boat, and 0 to 60 miles per hour, 97 km per hour, took 9.6 seconds. The muscle car may have gotten a fair amount of screen time in the 2004 Starsky and Hutch, but it was much slower than portrayed on the big screen. The The second generation Chevrolet Camaro was introduced in 1970, and during its first year on sale, it provided decent performance. From 1971 onwards, things started going downhill, performance-wise. The once mighty Chevy V8 started getting less and less powerful until the bottom was reached in 1975. During this year, the most powerful engine you could get on a Gen 2 Camaro was a 5.7-liter, 370 cubic inch V8 with 145 horsepower. There was an optional Z28 package, which offered some performance enhancements. Later in the year, power rose to 155 horsepower, but that hardly made any difference. The torque figures weren't very impressive either at 250 pound-feet, 339 Newton-meter. Depending on which transmission and package you opted for, 0 to 60 miles per hour, 97 km per hour, took between 10.5 and 12 seconds. While the Dodge Charger is one of the most iconic American muscle cars, even that wasn't spared from the oil crisis. The fourth generation of this Mopar debuted in 1975, and while it still came with a variety of 318, 360, and 400 cubic inch V8 engines, power was severely reduced compared to its predecessor. 1976 was the worst year of them all, since the range-topping 6.6-liter produced 185 horsepower and 285 pound-feet, 386 Newton-meter. The Charger was always a big, heavy car, and its curb weight of 4,250 pounds, 1,928 kg, certainly didn't aid performance either. The range-topping engine was mated exclusively to a 3-speed automatic, which allowed for a 0 to 60 miles per hour, 97 km per hour sprint in 11 seconds. Ford debuted the Mustang Fox body in 1978. A year later, a technological clone arrived in the form of the Mercury Capri, which was meant to be a more luxurious version of the pony car. It also came with exclusive Mercury badging to differentiate it from the European Ford Capri. Engine options were identical to the third-generation Ford Mustang, and 1980 was the weakest in terms of performance. The iconic 5.0 was not even offered for 1980, leaving the 4.2-liter V8 as the Capri's range-topping variant. The unit made a laughable 118 horsepower and 194 pound-feet, 263 Newton-meter. To make matters worse, the 2.3-liter Turbo 4 produced just as much power. With a 3-speed automatic, the gutless coupe needed 12.8 seconds to reach 60 miles per hour, 97 km per hour. As with other American manufacturers, the mid-1970s forced a downsizing trend. The Pontiac Grand Prix is a name that dates back to 1965, but for the fifth generation, 1978-1987, the big Grand Tourer became smaller, more fuel efficient, and less exciting. 1980 is one of the worst years for those looking to get good performance out of the Grand Prix. The 4.9-liter V8 was replaced by a smaller 4.3-liter producing 125 horsepower and 210 pound-feet, 285 Newton-meter. This means a 0 to 60 miles per hour, 97 km per hour time of 14 seconds. In 1981, there was also a 5.7-liter Oldsmoile diesel V8 with 105 horsepower and 205 pound-feet, 276 Newton-meter. That one did not sell well as it was expensive and unreliable, not to mention slow, with a 16.4 second 0 to 60 miles per hour, 97 km per hour time. Like other American muscle cars, the Pontiac Trans Am has been immortalized in movies, thanks to Smokey and the Bandit. The image of a Burt Reynolds-driven black and gold Pontiac has been seared in the minds of many, but sadly, the car's performance never lived up to the hype. In 1978, the 5-liter Chevrolet 305 V8 produced only 125 horsepower and 245 pound-feet, 332 Newton-meter. The sprint to 60 miles per hour, 97 kilometer per hour, felt more like an eternity, taking 12.9 seconds. In 1980, the 4.9-liter Pontiac 301 Turbo V8 was introduced. It put out 210 horsepower and 345 pound-feet, 464 Newton-meter. This dropped the 0 to 60 miles per hour, 97 kilometer per hour time to an impressive for those days 7.9 seconds. However, this came at the cost of complexity and reliability issues. Cars like the Buick GNX proved you don't always need a V8 to have muscle. In the early 2000s, GM attempted to replicate that with the 6th generation Chevrolet Monte Carlo. The execution was terrible. Essentially, they slapped an SS badge to a front-wheel drive coupe with a cheap interior and called it a day. The Monte Carlo SS's 3.8-liter V6 was not a big step up from the base 3.3-liter unit, as it made 200 horsepower, just 20 more than the base car. The 225 pound-feet, 305 Newton-meter torque figure wasn't much to write home about either. The only available transmission was a 4-speed automatic, which resulted in a mediocre 0 to 60 miles per hour, 97 kilometer per hour, time of 8.6 seconds. So, we have shared with you top 10 worst muscle cars that deserve to be scrapped. Hope they will be useful to you. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.